We are very excited to be here today with Dr. John McDougall. Dr. McDougall is a physician and a nutrition expert who has been studying, writing, and speaking about the effects of nutrition on disease for more than 41 years. Dr. McDougall is the founder and the director of the nationally renowned McDougall program, a 10-day residential program that he and his wife, Mary, host at a resort in Santa Rosa, California. Now, Dr. McDougall has cared for over 10,000 patients and over 6,000 patients in a live-in situation. His program not only promotes a broad range of dramatic and long-lasting health benefits, but most importantly, can also reverse serious illnesses, including high blood pressure, heart disease, and diabetes, without the use of pharmaceutical medication. Dr. McDougall and his wife are the authors of several best-selling books, including The Starch Solution and The Healthiest Diet on the Planet: Why the Foods You Love, like pizza, pancakes, potatoes, pasta, and more, are the solution to preventing disease and looking and feeling your best. They are also the co-founders of Dr. McDougall's Right Foods, which produces high-quality vegetarian cuisine to make it easier for people to eat on the go. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Dr. McDougall.
Well, good to be here. You just reminded me, that's what I was having this morning for breakfast. This is one of, I think this one's not even on the market.
Many people, they know your name, they know your philosophy. Maybe some of them have read your books, maybe some of them haven't. And you're sort of very popular for teaching people how to reverse diabetes altogether. But for some of our listeners, you're also brand new. So let's start at the very, very top. Can you give our listeners an idea of what actually causes type 2 diabetes?
Well, type 2 diabetes is caused by being too fat. Simply people gain so much body fat that the body says enough. The body will let you gain 20, 30, 40 pounds to get ready for wintertime, for the famine that's coming. But and that's good for survival, is to kind of bulk up some extra calories for the winter. But when you start getting into the 60 plus, 80, 100 pound range of excess weight, the body says, that's not so good. This is not a survival benefit to be that fat. You can't get up the tree to get away from the saber-toothed tiger. You can't get in the cave anymore. You're too fat. And so it develops insulin resistance. Insulin pushes fat into fat cells. The insulin becomes less sensitive as you increase body fat, because it doesn't want you to get in a situation where you develop, you just become obese and you can't function. So it stops functioning well, the insulin does, at the peripheral tissues. And at the same time, as it decreases the ability of the body to store more fat, as you develop insulin resistance, the goal is to not become obese, the insulin isn't as effective at pushing glucose into cells. And so the blood sugar goes up. And of course, the best way to lose the fat is to fix the problem. And the problem is food. So there are two categories of food poisoning to help people understand. Just like if somebody's a smoker, you say the way you solve the problem is you quit the 2 packs of Pall Malls a day. They say, I understand. Or if they're drunk, you say you stop the half a bottle of gin a day. I understand. And they can do it when they're ready. But when you tell people they need to eat better, as typically is done, you tell them things like, skin your chicken and skim your milk and cut down on your portions and all kinds of things. And people don't get that. And then when you tell them the truth, that the food poisons are animal foods and oils, they were really in a quandary then, because they say to themselves, there's nothing to eat. What am I going to eat? And then they find out what the truth is. And I brought that out in, many books. I've written 13 books. And they've all said the same thing, is that the human being is a starchitarian, a starch eater, a starchivore. And all large, successful populations of people throughout all verifiable history have lived on starch-based diets. Like, for example, the Aztecs and Mayans were known as the people of the corn. For 1,300 years, these populations lived on corn as their basic diet. And you think of Asia, the diet is rice. Before 1980, when they're eating 90% of their diet is white rice, Until now, they've changed from essentially zero diabetes and obesity to a population where over 12% of the people in China have diabetes and half are pre-diabetic. And so it's been throughout all of history. Is most of the common people, the workers, soldiers, they lived on rice, corn, beans, potatoes, and the rich folks, they would filter their food through a pig or a cow, and they wouldn't eat the natural starch. They'd eat the pig and cow. And that's just not for human beings. So as a result of eating the wrong food, the poison, they become sick with obesity and type 2 diabetes and all kinds of problems. Just look around you. More than half the people you see in the room right now are sick from eating like a king and queen. And the way you solve the problem is you just change it back to the human diet, which is a diet based on starch. But everybody's afraid of starch, even though that's what basically everybody's eating.
Let's talk about that for a second. So you're exactly right. Everybody is afraid of starch. And a big thing that's going on, especially in the world of diabetes, is the ketogenic diet.
Yeah.
And people can follow that diet. They get really steady blood glucose readings. They lose weight.
Yeah. Any way you can lose weight. We used to wire people's teeth together. That was a common practice to lose weight.
Why can people eat the ketogenic diet and see good blood glucose numbers if the fat is the cause of diabetes?
Well, it's being over fat. Their body's over fat. Also, fat paralyzes insulin activity. And carbohydrate, even white sugar, makes insulin work more effectively. So it's that part, but it's just, being overweight that causes it. As I say, bariatric surgery studies that published many places, including JAMA, show about an 80% cure rate from just rearranging their intestinal tract and causing them to lose weight. And yeah, it can be permanent because if you take part of your intestinal tract out or in some other way rearrange it, you become permanently sick and you lose the weight permanently. So that's one way to cure diabetes. Yeah. But unfortunately, the ketogenic diet actually is pushed really hard, including by the American Medical Association. And people buy into it because they like pork chops. As long as you cook them. They won't eat that pork piece if you don't cook it, and you got to put barbecue sauce on it. Otherwise, it's too disgusting. But here, this is the January 16, 2018 issue of JAMA. And that's an article. I was going to sleep last night and just happened to be reading JAMA. It says, interest in ketogenic diet grows for weight loss and type 2 diabetes. Well, that was last week. When I wrote the last book, probably the last book I'll ever write, it's called The Healthiest Diet on the Planet. It's a good book. It's real simple. Lots and lots of pictures. I started the book out. Let's see if I can find the page. There are lies and damn lies is the first chapter. And what it says is damn lies harm the public and planet Earth. In June 2015, the Journal of the American Medical Association, in a reckless opinion piece, called for the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Department of Health and Human Services to remove an upper limit of intake of total dietary fat in the most recent dietary guidelines for Americans. That's the 2015-2020 guidelines that we live under right now. And to my dismay, I wrote as the first part of this book, to my dismay, the authors of the article also applauded the elimination of dietary cholesterol as a nutrient of concern. Well, cholesterol is only found in animal foods, but they're still promoting ketogenic diets, which kill people. And there are still, quote, legitimate doctors out there that are behind this. A diet, as I say, which was limited once to kings and queens and pharaohs and priests and to Inuit Eskimos. Otherwise, the other 99 billion people that have ever lived on this planet have lived on a diet that was somewhere around 70 to 90% starch.
So, Dr. McDougall, I got a question for you here. You talk very openly about the dangers of pharmaceutical medication. So here you're talking about insulin, but there's also some very large dangers with the use of pharmaceutical medication over the course of time. And these include oral diabetes medications as well as statin medications. So can you give our viewers some specifics about what are some of the long-term dangers of oral medication?
So the body, the way it takes in nutrients is the food goes into the gut. It has to cross the gut wall to get into the blood, the nutrients do. usually after some bit of digestion. They cross into the blood, but they don't get into the nervous system, into the spinal fluid until they pass the blood-brain barrier. And there are certain statins that are lipophilic, which means they easily go through the blood-brain barrier. And these are statins like lovastatin, simvastatin, Lipitor, and so on. And these are the ones associated with brain damage. Zocor is a terrible drug, simvastatin. I won't prescribe it. In fact, the FDA told doctors not to prescribe, that's about 5-6 years ago, 80 milligram doses. And so you're really only allowed to prescribe 40 milligram doses. And studies at that time came out and showed that there was an increase in thickness of the artery walls in people who were on Zocor. And a combination of the two. So anyway, there are statins that I use because people are at high risk of dying of heart disease. My favorite is Pravachol, or Pravastatin it's called. And it works really well, and there's some evidence, I think good evidence, that says it's one that most effectively reduces your risk of dying of heart disease. And it's the safest one to take. So not every statin is not the same. So if I have somebody who's had a stroke or heart surgery or a heart attack, high risk of having another one, I'll put them on a statin. I do it with some hesitation, but I'm a doctor, and I certainly want to do the best I can for my patients. And I don't want to cause to myself undue criticism for not practicing good medicine. So I'll put people on a drug like Pravastatin. And as far as diabetes go, type 1 diabetic has to be on substitute insulin. It's required, they die. So I prescribe insulin. I usually prescribe a long-acting type. Lantus is the one I usually prescribe because that's what I'm familiar with. But there are other kinds of long-acting insulin. And even a type 1 diabetic can give themselves one shot of long-acting insulin a day. They can divide it up and add some short-acting and so on and so on. But what I do when I find type 1.5 diabetics, people who are trim, are making insulin, but not quite enough to keep them from losing too much weight or developing frequent urination, I put them on a little bit of Lantus, maybe 8 milligrams, maybe 12 milligrams, and so on. And that excess weight loss stops, and the excess urination stops, and their mother-in-law stops nagging them, and the doctor stops criticizing them for not taking these handful of pills. I prescribe no other diabetic medication. None other. Not metformin, not sulfonylureas.
Well, one other thing to mention here is that in 2010, there was a paper published in The Lancet, which I'm sure you're familiar with, that showed, it was a meta-analysis that showed that the use of statins, prolonged use of statins, actually increases the risk for type 2 diabetes by between 9 and 12%.
Yeah, that's actually, I think that's in the PDR now. I think they have a warning in the PDR that's a 15% increase. You got to do the best you can for patients. You can't take the attitude just because you believe in food that you're not going to give them other advantages that are out there. And there are advantages to drugs. I do believe that in very sick people that a statin will reduce the risk of stroke and heart attack. And I'm talking about very sick people. And I know for sure that some people with diabetes, particularly toward the type 1 range, they absolutely have to have a substitute insulin. I know that for sure. So you can't take an all or nothing attitude. You have to look at what you're doing, and you try and get the foundation fixed, which is food poisoning. And then you have to use medications that will do more good than harm. Most of the diabetic drugs, including metformin, which is the doctor's time-honored, wonderful, best treatment, is a drug I will not prescribe. And you can read about this and why in my January 2017 newsletter, which is at drmcdougall.com. You can read the research. You can read how dangerous these drugs are. Yeah, they lower sugar. All you have to do to get approved as a diabetic drug is to show that you can lower the blood sugar without immediately killing the patient. That's basically it. And there was a lot of criticism about this. A lot of criticism 5, 6, 10 years ago. And it's still an FDA rule. All you have to do is show you can lower blood sugar. that these kinds of treatments increase the risk of heart attacks. The Advance Accord Veteran Study published in 2008 in the New England Journal of Medicine showed an increase in risk of dying of heart disease. So much so that in the Accord study, the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute stopped the study 17 months early. They showed that aggressive treatment, trying to make a patient normal, which is considered by doctors to be a blood test called a hemoglobin A1C of 6%. They published in these large studies involving thousands of patients that aggressive treatment of diabetes kills. And so now the new drugs, when you watch the ads, the new drugs will say, and we lower the risk of heart disease, because they found some diabetic drugs that not only lower blood sugar, but also lower cholesterol levels. And so that's the new pitch. But when you read my January 2017 newsletter, it's been more than a year since I've written it, so I won't try and quote it. You'll see that they increase the risk of many other problems in patients. These are dangerous drugs.
So speaking of that, I mean, you have a lot of great newsletters. You also have one about, called How I Treat Diabetes, which is a terrific one, and we'll link it up. But basically, you have written extensively on the history of insulin resistance and showing that high carbohydrate, starch-based foods are actually beneficial for people living with diabetes. So you touched on Walter Kempner. Can you go backwards a little bit and just give us a quick review of the history, going all the way back to Hemsworth?
All the way back to Hemsworth and Sweeney. Again, you're asking me to remember things I haven't thought about in a long while. But in 1940, Hemsworth published a study in the British Medical Journal, which should have ended this argument in 1940. And he showed that feeding high-fat diets raise blood sugar and create type 2 diabetes. And a low-fat, high-carbohydrate diet would actually cure type 2 diabetes, published in the British Medical Journal in 1940. And so he's that kind of the Percival Hemsworth, I think his name was. And then Shirley Sweeney, who was a man, not a girl. He did a study on his students where he fed them a high sugar diet. I mean, it was candy and sugar and so on. And they were all non-diabetic. And then he fed them a high fat diet, meat and oil and so on. And all the students became diabetic, like almost overnight. And that was published in 1927. That should have settled it all. Well, so there's a lot of research. James Anderson from University of Kentucky, back in the 1970s, he published that he could get essentially everybody. This is the University of Kentucky. Almost all diabetics off their pills, and could get about 70-80% of type 2 diabetics off their insulin. This is not a new idea or a new discovery. You're just fighting the truth and success, in other words, the correct diet, against the money, which is the meat, dairy, and processed food industries. They're very simple, folks. This is not a mysterious science. It's just the money. And unfortunately, the patients pay. And as I say, the Journal of the American Medical Association, which is the journal of doctors, promotes ketogenic diets. And as I said, my publisher, Harper One, they said, you cannot put that in there. Those are the lead sentences in the healthiest diet on the planet. I've not heard from them. I've not heard from their attorneys. And the article published last week says the same thing. You need to be on a ketogenic diet, which will kill people. And it kills, of course, obviously, billions of animals. And is killing planet Earth, yet they get away with it.
Okay, so...
Was I clear enough?
Yeah, very clear, very clear. Now, you have had, just an overwhelming amount of experience working with patients and actually helping people reverse type 2 diabetes. It's amazing. So
100% of the time.
It's incredible. Over all the years, what has been the number one challenge that you see people face when it comes to making these lifestyle changes, and how do you help them overcome that challenge?
Well, the number one challenge is that they hear otherwise. Like I said, I just showed you January 16th, 2018 article from JAMA. When JAMA comes out and says that you need to eat a ketogenic diet, in other words, a diet of meat and butter and bacon, the Atkins diet, that's what you should be eating. And they listen to McDougall or you guys, or they go, oh, heck. Yeah, you're talking about the American Medical Association. and they get confused. But fewer and fewer people are getting confused. There's something about the truth and success that kind of bleeds out under all that money. And more people are discovering that they do have control of their health. What they have to do is they have to stop the cause of the problem, which is food poisoning from animal foods and oils. And they have to reintroduce the human diet, which is a starch-based diet. When you look at your plate, you should see 90% of the food as potatoes and or rice and or corn and a few vegetables and a few fruits. That's what the human being is designed to live on. That's what our real winning athletes eat today. Our marathon and triathlon winners are most of them are from Kenya and Ethiopia, where 80% of the diet is corn and grains. And I tell stories, and you probably heard about these stories, about how gladiators were known as the barley men, and they lived on barley and beans. Why? Because the men who owned these men, these fighters, these gladiators, wanted them to win. It's just like if you were a racehorse owner, and you were going to the Kentucky Derby. You wouldn't say to the racehorse that you hope to win the Kentucky Derby, you wouldn't say, would you like a pork chop today? No, you'd say, look, buddy, I want you to win that race, and I want you to be best fueled, and so they feed what a horse is supposed to eat. And that's why they used to feed gladiators barley and beans. And they were essentially vegans because, the gladiators were the stars at the time. They were the rock stars. They were, I'm sure, very expensive to own. And I'm sure there was a lot of money at stake in winning, and there were their lives at stake. And so they wanted these men to be in top shape. So they would not allow them to eat meat, as the general population did. They allowed them a diet that best fuels the human being, which is a starch-based diet. They were known as the barley men. So you have to get the message across to people. And once they learn, people who like themselves, they quit smoking, they quit drinking heavy alcohol, they quit eating food poisons, if they like themselves. Now, there are a lot of people who don't like themselves, and I don't know how you fix that. We have the best psychologist in the world working with us, Doug Lyle. If you hadn't had him on, you should have him on. And, if you don't like yourself, it's really hard to save you. But if you like yourself, and somebody tells you the reason you have greasy skin and pimples, the reason you have a rock-hard bowel movement, the reason your joints hurt, the reason you feel like terrible is because of the food. Once somebody tells you that, you really figure it out as more and more people are learning, even in the face of all these commercials. But then you start eating the right food, and you go, wow, what a miracle. And I dropped my food bill by 80%. And I feel good about not killing animals. And I can understand the connection of destruction of the planet by the livestock industry. You go, phew, there's so many reasons to do the right thing. So you have to know what the right thing is, and unfortunately, you have to teach it all or nothing. I've told you I can't get drunks to sober up unless they stop, and I can't get cigarette smokers to smoke 2 cigarettes a day. Same thing with food. You may find yourself in a situation with most people. You just can't have that one bite of pepperoni pizza.
I love how the way you teach a diet, it's so simple and it's so easy and it's delicious. And I know people resonate with that. And a lot of our experts answered that question the same way. It's the confusing information.
Yeah.
So we really, really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today and clear up a lot of things that are confusing, and you continue to do it through your newsletter. You've been doing this for a long time. So
I've been doing it for a long time. People say I should retire, and maybe I should, but I can't because I wouldn't know what to do with myself. So, as time goes on, maybe you'll have me on the show in 5 years, 10 years. I'll look 75, 85, hopefully 90 years old, but hopefully I can still do the same thing, which is help other people like you're doing. The greatest gift in life is to help other people.